So now the big question is like, how did I get from such a positive place from the second podcast all the way down to where I'm going to prison? And it's a story of missed opportunities and not working the program. And if there's one thing that I would want people to take away from this is the fact that complacency in one's recovery is detrimental.
You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 176 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week I'll be sharing a conversation that I had with my friend, my sponsee, and past guest of the podcast, Rye T. And it's hard to believe that it was 150 episodes ago when Rye was the first person courageous enough to share his first step here on the podcast on episode 26. That was all the way back in August of 2021. We had Rye on again on episode 51 in April of 2022, kind of catching us up where he had been since his first step and the troubles that he was having along the way. As you'll hear in this conversation, Rye and I started working these steps earlier this year, and I really wish that it was under better circumstances that we'd be having this conversation on the podcast. But as I'm recording this, Rye will be heading into prison in a few days for the next 5 years. And he wanted to share his story as a cautionary tale and to talk about some of the things that have been going on over the past year or so in his step work and spiritual growth. So if you're a regular podcast listener, you'll know that a few years ago, I pulled down his episodes 26 and 51, and we'll be getting to that in our conversation. But a while ago, Rye gave me the permission to repost those episodes. And for the reading this week, I picked out a few readings and couldn't really narrow it down, so I decided to read all three. First, starting with the SAA pamphlet, Writing to Prisoners, and this is part of the service series of pamphlets, and I wanted to read a few portions of it. The beginning says, "The ISO office receives many requests from prisoners seeking help in recovery from compulsive sexual behavior. They usually ask for literature and about corresponding with a member of the SAA fellowship. Many of these prisoners have little family support, and most have very limited, if any, access to recovery resources within their institutions. The purpose of the ISO Prisoner Outreach Program is to facilitate carrying the SAA message of recovery to sex addicts inside jails and prisons. This is accomplished primarily through providing published materials to prisoners and connecting prisoners with SAA members on the outside who are willing to correspond with the prisoner. For the prisoner, this is a lifeline of recovery information and support. And for the letter writer, it is an excellent opportunity for gratifying service beyond the local level." And I'm going to read a paragraph from the next section, how correspondence begins, and then a section of guidelines for letter writers. "The ISO office maintains a list of SAA members who are willing to write prisoners. Periodic campaigns to sign up additional letter writers are conducted by broadcast emails, by direct contact with previous letter writers, through group and intergroup leaders, and by special efforts of the ISO Prisoner Outreach Committee. A member interested in becoming a letter writer may sign up on the service website or may learn more by telephoning the ISO office." In guidelines for letter writers, the Prisoner Outreach Committee, with full support from the ISO office, has developed a procedure to assure anonymity and maximize safety for members of the fellowship participating in the program, and to allow tracking of the letter writing activity. And I'm going to skip the next paragraph. "A letter writer should ideally have the following qualifications: minimum of 1 year experience in the SAA program, minimum of 6 months continuous personal sobriety, completion of the 12 steps with a sponsor, commitment to carry our message of experience, strength, and hope to prisoners desiring to recover from sex addiction, and prior service as a sponsor if possible." The prisoner letter writing program does not serve merely to provide pen pals for prisoners, but rather it is designed to encourage the possibility of sponsorship by correspondence. Since working the 12 steps with the sponsor is the heart of the SAA program of recovery, we want to offer that opportunity to the incarcerated addict. And the rest of the pamphlet has information on how to get in touch with the ISO if you are interested. So like I had mentioned at the beginning of the recording, that Rye and I have been working on the steps this year, starting off in January on step 1. We had a little stumbling block on step 4 that you'll hear in our conversation, and we're just finishing step 8 and starting step 9, and hopefully have 9 and 10 before Rye goes into prison. So step 10 will be basically working steps 1 through 9 on a daily basis. But in our conversation and in our sponsor-sponsee relationship, there was a bit of contention on using the old school AA Big Book and the 12 and 12. And Rye had mentioned it in this conversation that it's really hard to understand the 4th step out of the Green Book without first understanding the 4th step in the AA Big Book. And I wanted to read part of the instructions in the Big Book on working step 4 on resentments, starting from the bottom of page 64, and I'll be jumping around a bit. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry, and that is column 1. We asked ourselves why we were angry, and that is column 2. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up, and that is column 3. And what follows on page 65 is a 3-column grid. I'm resentful at being the first, the cause being the second, and affects my being the third. So to get to that 4th column on page 67 in the middle, it says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. And so that is the 4th column of the resentment grid. The 4th step here is a springboard for steps 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So thinking of step 9 and where we are currently in our step work, I wanted to read the last paragraph of step 9 in the Green Book, and this is at the top of page 52. And it says, working step 9 brings us many gifts: true empathy for those we have harmed, compassion, self-respect, and respect for the humanity of others. God willing, we may experience the forgiveness of those we have harmed. If we have been diligent in our amends, we will currently grow in our self-forgiveness too. As a result of accepting responsibility for the harm we have done, even to those who may have hurt us, we glimpse new possibilities for loving and forgiving others. Our faith in our higher power increases when we realize that we've squarely faced the wrongs in our past, made amends for them, and received the gift of a better future. The process that began in the 4th step and culminated in the 9th now becomes a part of our lives, a daily stance, a practice that will keep us sexually sober and spiritually connected. We will now take step 10. And so throughout our conversation, we did talk about step 4 and a little bit on steps 8 and 9. And part of Rye's amends is taking responsibility for his actions. And that is the sad consequence that he is facing with heading into prison, but one that he's ready to face. We recorded this a few weeks ago, and I wanted to make sure that I edited this in time so that he can hear it before he turns himself in. So the end of this episode will be fairly quick. I do have a song to play that he suggested, and I also have a little thing that I wanted to read at the end. Just a trigger warning, if you haven't heard episodes 26 or 51 where we get into Rye's story, it does involve minor attraction. We will be discussing that. And additionally, I wanted to mention that I had a recording that was done previous to this one as episode 176, but I pushed that one off until the next episode so I can get this one published before Rye went into prison. And so now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Rye. I hope you enjoy it.
Right. But that's where sometimes the gold is, right?
Yeah,
Like, when they don't go as necessarily as you want them to, it's kind of like life. Sometimes little surprises pop up that may look like inconveniences at first, but then when you delve deeper into it, they were blessings. So
yeah, totally. I get you.
So first, I want to thank you for having me on here for a trifecta for the action.
Yeah.
It's funny. Like, I was so sure of myself the first two times I've been on here, but this time, like, I was really nervous. Like, and I am still nervous. And I think it's because I genuinely care about what I say and how it can reach people. There's one thing that I've learned over the last 4 years since doing the first podcast was how much that has impacted people and how much people have reached out to me and say that I encourage them to do better in their recovery, which is very humbling to me, and especially since in the second podcast, I didn't stay sober and I was trying to find my way back. And that didn't happen, as I'm going to get into. But did you have any questions you have for me before I kind of start just going?
Not really. Just, I'm really grateful that you reached out to do this one, and it is going to be an important one. Do you want to just let the cat out of the bag in terms of?
Yeah, so let's do kind of like what they call jump scares, right? So like something that just jumps, right? So as if we're doing this podcast, I am 12 days from being incarcerated, probably close to 5 years. That's the minimum. I could get more. It really is going to depend on the judge. So now the big question is like, how did I get from such a positive place from the second podcast all the way down to where I'm going to prison? And it's a story of, missed opportunities and not working the program. And if there's one thing that I would want people to take away from this is the fact that complacency in one's recovery is detrimental.
Yeah.
And as you know, Jason, like the steps are never completed. It's kind of like a tool that needs to continue to be sharpened, or else it gets dull over time. So fast forwarding, because I sometimes the years kind of blend together.
Yeah.
Fast forward to because I think when we last talked, I was getting my son back at the beginning of 2023 in January sometime. I think it was around that time period. And so it only took about a month later, and I was in my therapist's office. I was on the floor in a fetal position. And I won't get into specifics because I'm not trying to trigger anybody. But like I was crossing more and more of my son's boundaries, personal boundaries, like personal physical boundaries. And my son. So let me back up.
Yeah.
So I will use son and daughter interchangeably here because my child identifies as a boy but born a girl. But he is still very much in not come out yet because of the world that we live in right now.
Yes.
So like only his loved ones and close friends know. So if I switch pronouns, I only have one child, so it's the same one. So if I say he or her, just know that's the same one. Now that we got that also out of the bag. So I was crossing more and more of my child's boundaries. And the way I was crossing these boundaries was making me sexually aroused. And I knew this was not a good place. I didn't molest my child by any means, but I knew that I was going down that road. And so I'm in my therapist's office bawling because like I wanted to stop, but I didn't know if I could stop. So what we decided was, because she was like saying, I don't know if I need to make a mandatory report. So we talked about that. And so I made the decision in that office to go ahead and report myself to Child Protective Services, which is the point of where everything kind of spiraled out to where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
So the CPS worker came. I was a real mess, interviewed me, well, more like interrogated me really hard, asked me all a bunch of questions. So when he left, I was like trying to snap out of this, like I was in a real bad spot mentally. And I knew that when my son came home, I was going to have to tell him that he was going to have to go back to his grandparents. And so that was really hard. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and clean up the apartment that I was living in at the time. I was going to make myself presentable. And I was going to show this CPS worker who said he was coming back later in the week the best side of me. So when he comes back, he drops this bombshell on me that his report's going to find me culpable of child abuse. But it wasn't significant enough to where he said he had to turn it over to the police. But I'm like, I made a decision right then and there that I wasn't going to try to appeal it. And I had 6 months to decide. And it was probably one of the bigger regrets because I don't know how it is in other states, but in the state of Iowa, you don't have to be charged with anything to be put on a abuse registry, which is different than the sex offenders registry. So I was put on an abuse registry, and that was going to be like for 10 years. And I was devastated then. And I didn't appeal it, but I'm like, okay, I was definitely had shades of my arrogance. And I'm like, well, you never dealt with anyone like me. I'm going to show you that I'm going to work harder than anyone you've ever had to work with to be able to get my child back. And the thing is, Jason, I truly meant it at the time. I really, really did. But the addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. So after he left, I got a case manager. Now, this case manager talked to my psychiatrist, and my psychiatrist told me that they had a hard time deciding whether or not I was guilty of abuse or not. And of course, when I confronted my case manager on it, he denied it. Of course, because why would my psychiatrist lie to me? Like, that's kind of one of those things. The process that should have taken a couple months took a year because he wanted me to sign over guardianship. But I still would have parental rights, which means that I would still have the right to see my child. Even though I would give up guardianship, they couldn't prevent me from seeing my child. That was kind of how it was explained to me. And I had a hard time coming to terms with that because I didn't want to. I thought this was something that I could fix. And I remember one meeting we had, I told him, there's no way in hell I'm giving up guardianship. Just ain't no way. It was the only time he got really defensive with me. It was like saying, okay, well, let's just get the ball rolling and let's just take this to the courts. But eventually I just like, well, let me think about it. I eventually made the decision, and I remember being in my living room with this paperwork. I was by myself, and I really wanted my family there, but there was a miscommunication. And I remember looking at the paper, and it's like saying, I said my child's name, and like, please forgive me. And then I signed it, made it official that I was going to give up guardianship. And the reason why it also took so long was the fact they had a program where they had a pro bono lawyer doing the work, and she just kept pushing it off and pushed it off because it had to be done with a lawyer so it wouldn't cost me anything. And this is what was kind of like this program that this was supposed to be. So it was kind of like one of those things where it was like I was constantly reminded every day for a year that I was a shit father, that I had to give up guardianship. And on top of all that, I wasn't staying sober. And it's really sad when I looked at myself, I'm like, you already lost so much and you can't stay sober. What does that really say about your character? So that's kind of where the first part of kind of like where everything kind of went, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions before I go on?
The first one was there was a period of time where we pulled your podcast episodes because of you wanting to talk to your son about stuff. Do you remember where that was in the timeline?
So that was around the same time period, and it was one of those things where my sister had approached me and laid out a good case of why I should take the podcast down. And I agreed to that. But as I'll get later into the story, she had already recorded the podcast on her own. She listened to the podcast and recorded it on her end before she even approached me to take them down. And that's going to be an important detail later. But I agreed to take it down for a little bit, and then I ended up changing my mind just because of how many people had reached out to me and said that they were really inspired by my story. So I thought it was selfish of me not to have those up there, especially in the second one. I remember saying, don't ever take these down. So 2024 was a really, really rough year. I had my son over for weekends with the condition that my mom had to be there. So I ended up having to move back in with my mom, and that's a whole nother story that I don't have time for. But I moved back in with my mom, which was beneficial in a way because that means my son could spend the night on the weekends. And so that was okay. And it was one of those things where I didn't appreciate what I had when I had it. Right. So, but I was in a dark place by the end of 2024. And I'm like, I really need to do something. Even putting it aside, if I ever wanted my guardianship back, if I want to be a good example to my son, like I have to do something to do the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I reached out to you, and it was in December. It was early December. And
I remember.
And I'm like, look, I need someone to be my sponsor that's not going to fall for my bullshit. to put it like that. I'd been in the program since 2013 and I had stretches of sobriety. I knew intellectually the program in and out for the most part, but I didn't have a spiritual concept of the program and I didn't have the surrender aspect because I had been arrogant enough to think that I could have recovery and still have the addiction too. And I needed someone that had more experience than me, not even just sobriety wise, but also length and time in program. And that's not a lot of people that I knew at that time,
Yeah.
intimately knew. And so we penned it until after the holidays, and then we agreed. And I don't know if you remember this, but you told me at the time, like saying, I'm going to take you in, but we have to do a step a month. And which is like, great, that's fine. I can do that. So that was at the beginning of January. And the other thing was I decided to finally get a different therapist. And in my area, we only have one CSAT, certified sex addiction therapist. And I was told by my psychiatrist I needed to see this therapist. And I, at the time, was like saying, you're not going to tell me who I can and cannot see. So I resisted going to see this guy. But I decided to finally like, okay, I'm going to give this guy a shot. I'm going to try this CSAT thing and see if I can't spark this recovery and work on it from different angles. And this is where kind of the bottom fell out. So towards the end of January, I get a knock on the door, right? And two detectives from the city had gotten a tip that I was on the podcast and that I had mentioned I had watched child pornography. And so, and I mentioned some devices that I had during those podcasts. And so it's like they wouldn't tell me who it was. They said it was an anonymous tip. On the one hand, I'm like saying someone has no life and is scouring through the internet to find people to try to get them in trouble. That's what I was sounding like. I did mention my city and my state, so I'm like, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that someone could listen to the podcast, listen to my story, and like decided to take some sort of action. Like that wasn't out of the realm of possibility. So that's what I thought. So they questioned me in their car. It was a cold January day, and they asked for my electronics. Now, here's the deal. Intellectually, I knew that I didn't have to hand over my electronics. And I knew that if I made him get a warrant, that I could get rid of the evidence, essentially, right? Like, I knew I had stuff that probably could get me in trouble. But the thing was, I was living with my mom. What I didn't want to happen was I didn't want the police, the feds, or whoever to kick down my mom's front door and ransack her house looking for these electronic devices because I knew how much it would traumatize my mom if something like that happened. And so I made the difficult decision to voluntarily give up my electronics, knowing that I was probably more than likely going to be something on there. So I did that. And this is kind of one of those things where, God was looking out for me, even though I didn't know it at the time. The investigation got pushed back and kept getting pushed back long enough to where my child's birthday is on April 20th. I was able to have one last birthday with him, and we had a really great birthday. He stayed in over that weekend. And I'm still thinking, like, everyone's reassuring me. It's like, look, if they would have found something, they would have arrested you by now. If it was, like, I was getting all these, like, encouragements. Like, these are good signs. Like, you don't got anything to worry about. So I was drinking that Kool-Aid. And so when the day came, because I was told it was going to be the Wednesday, like, it would get finalized the Wednesday after my child's birthday. And I remember getting the phone call and the detective saying that he had to take me in. It was like time slowed, but also speeding up at the same time. I felt like the floor was it just went underneath me. So I told my mom, and of course my mom was devastated. And so then I got put in handcuffs and got taken to the county jail. One thing I forgot to mention, so I asked him what charges they would be, right? So like they said it was going to be federal. And I'm like, how the hell did it get federal? Like this was just a simple county thing. As I would find out later, and I've heard from more than one person in a professional setting. So this isn't just me making this up. But the federal government's got a reputation of only taking these type of cases when they have a slam dunk case. Or else they would go hand it to the state level, or they would let the state take care of it. Even if that's 1% true, I find that to be kind of shameful. If there's any remote truth to that at all, like that to me is kind of sad. Because then at that point, to me, you're not worrying about keeping children safe. You just want notches under your belt. You want easy victories. And so, like I said, I don't know how much of that's true, but I heard it from more than one professional source in my life. And these are people that I've known for a good long time that consented to the same thing. But that's not really in any of the point, right? So like I was in county for 6 days, learned a lot during that time period. And, it was a valuable experience. It wasn't one I wanted to repeat, but I didn't know how serious my situation was. Like, I knew how serious my situation was because of the arraignment and stuff. And I saw my charges and I saw what the maximum amount of years. Like, if they really wanted to go for the jugular, I could have been sentenced to 40 years in prison. Like, that was the maximum. So I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm already scared shitless. And I'll tell you what, there's nothing more sobering than seeing on official paper, United States of America versus your name on
Mm-hmm.
paper.
Mm-hmm.
So like that was very sobering. So then I should tell this part. You have to have a bond hearing, whether or not you can be released on bond or you stay in county throughout the duration of this process. And then, of course, the government, being the government of the United States, tried really hard to push the case that I was a danger to society, right? The judge, on the other hand, said that she had never heard anything of my case like this before where I would turn myself in to protect my own child, and
Mm-hmm.
that I was already getting so much help prior to my arrest. That's something that she said she never seen in her years of being on the bench. And the fact that I had no criminal history or anything else like that. So she let me go on a recognizance bond, which means I just promised I come to court and I won't skip trial or anything. So that was good. So I mean, I got to go home. If I have time, I'll circle back to the probation officer that I have. I hear a lot of times that probation officers are dicks, and like this guy was far from that. And if I have time, I'll get back to that. But I eventually had another meeting with my attorney after I got out of county and I was, out on bond, monitored to release. And yeah, I'm sorry. I'm kind of jumping all over the place because there are important details here. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
apologize. So when I got released, I had to go to the federal probation office to get the ankle monitor on me. And there were terms and agreements that I had to abide by. And one of the things is I could not be in contact with minors, and that includes my son, in any way, shape, or form. I couldn't write him, I couldn't call him, I couldn't text him, I couldn't email him, I couldn't give him gifts unless I went through an agency. And I found out that agency charges $60 an hour.
Yeah, yeah, I remember that.
And I was so devastated. I was crying in the federal probation office. I was so tempted to tell them to put me back in jail. Because while I was in jail, I could still call him and talk to him over the phone, over my mom's phone, because I thought that would be more appropriate than calling him directly. So now I won't even have that. And so it was a really bad deal. But, I'm kind of like, okay, I still have a chance to see him. But then I got to my attorney and we sat down and she didn't when she dropped the bombshell. But the anonymous tip was my sister,
Yeah.
that she had tipped the police about the podcast. I knew my sister didn't really think highly of me, and there was justifications for that, right? Because I had anger issues. We had past encounters of where I was verbally and emotionally abusive to not just her but to my mom. So she's got legit reasons to why she's not my biggest fan. But I didn't think she hated me enough at the time. This is what I thought
Mm-hmm.
at the time, that she hated me so much that she would take me out of my son's life like that. I was really angry, but it was also a really big turning point for me as far as the spiritual aspect of things, because I had to sit on that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, we're still working the steps. I'm still going to meetings. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to. I'm not doing anything that would violate my probation, staying clear and clean from a legal standpoint. But I was still having problems with fantasy. And that's the thing, like, in fantasy is not illegal, right? But I was still
Mm-hmm.
struggling with fantasies. And I was still having these angry outbursts every once in a while. And it was just kind of like, I just kind of felt lost. Like, I just don't want to be this angry, bitter person anymore. So I did something one day that I haven't done in my entire adult life. Maybe I've done it once. And that is, I started talking to God. I paced around my room and talking to God that I see now, because I had an epiphany before that, because I went on a 3-mile walk prior to this. And I had this epiphany that my sister did what she did because she loved my son and she thought it
Mm-hmm.
was best. And on the way, she did it because she loved me, because she knew I was struggling really bad. And I had been trying to get help for this for so many years, and I had plateaued.
Yeah.
So I was like, she did this for my son primarily, but she also, in a way, did this for me too. I was talking to God, and I'm like, I know I had to lose a lot of things because it was the only way to get me to get to this point where I need to completely surrender for the first time in my entire life. And I acknowledge that it could not have been done unless I had to lose all the things that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a promise to God that it's like no matter what happened from that point forward, no matter what more I had to lose and what other hard lessons I had to learn, that I was never going to forsake him again. And I'm not going to say like the sky opened up and like angels started singing or anything like that didn't happen, but things started to become more clear. So I started believing in God, but God also turns out has a very funny sense of humor. And the answer to my spiritual questions was right in front of my face. But before I get to that, I decided that I was going to do a little therapeutic slash spiritual exercise where my dad, and I shared this, I'm pretty
Mm-hmm.
sure in the podcast, that he was an alcoholic who was very emotionally, verbally abusive to my mom. And he died shortly before my son was born. So it's been over 13 years. Now, I also shared in previous podcasts that I had gotten caught looking at child pornography when I was 16 around
Yeah. Yeah.
and then that my parents didn't get me into therapy then and I had to struggle for 3 more years. Now, here's what happens. My dad got sober towards the end of his life and I prematurely forgave him. Problem with that was I hadn't gotten into recovery myself at that point. I was
Mm-hmm.
still very much in active addiction and whatever. So like my dad got a free pass. So then when I started really going into recovery and started working on myself, I shifted the blame to my
Yeah.
mom. And I would take out this anger that I would have that I didn't get help back then on her. And any other type of like anger issues that I had, she was the target. And so when I was talking to God, I realized like if my dad was still here, he wouldn't have been left off the hook. Like I would have talked to him. I would have told him this. So I'm like, I have 13 years of grievances that I need to get out into the open. So what I did was I did some sort of little seance thing, not like no
Yeah. Not
chanting
like
or
at a
anything else like
cult.
that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, but I got my dad's military flag, his ashes, and a lot of his personal belongings
Mm-hmm.
that I had in the house, and I put them on a little table, and I asked my mom to bear witness to what I was doing. So I did this little ritual where I brought him back from the spirit realm, and I aired 13 years worth of grievances, not only
Mm.
just for about me, but what he did to my mom and what he did to my sister. And it lasted an hour. And in an hour, it just me just pouring my heart out and pouring my anger and my, just like saying, were you really arrogant enough to think that death was going to protect you from answering for the sins that you've done?
Mm-hmm.
And then an amazing thing happened after that. After I said all my grievances and I said all the things I wanted to say, I sent him back to the spirit realm and told him that I love him and that I truly forgave him this time. That I really did forgive him. My anger disappeared.
Wow. Wow.
My bitterness, my anger, my need to always have to be right at all costs, the
Mm-hmm.
all those things, all those really bad character defects that I had used to abuse others. Never physically, but emotionally and verbally. All those tendencies went away. And that's when I realized that I knew that I had to live my life through the teachings and through the heart and the mind of Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
That was what the answer was. And I had been a fan of Buddhism for years, but I never really converted. I never like really actually practiced the practice. But then from that day forward, I started practicing the practice. And
Mm-hmm.
as it turns out, someone from one of the meetings I go to is a Buddhist monk and really took me under his wing and really kind of showed me how to meditate. We went over some of the texts and stuff like that, and we
Mm-hmm.
talk almost every day. He's my spiritual teacher and a really good friend. So I pray and I meditate, and we do a meditation thing every night. And so even if I don't meditate during the day, I still do at least a 15 meditation every night.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that spiritually I'm in the best place I've ever been. I love myself more than I ever have. I feel like I love everyone more than I ever did. And I mean, obviously, no one wants to go to prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've decided to really kind of flip this on its head. This is going to be my Odyssey. This is going to be my Iliad. This is going to be my trip across the ocean and back. This is going to be my voyage to really discovering and turning the potential into actual essence
Mm-hmm.
of in the spiritual concept. And it's not goodbye. It's a see you later. And I made a timeline for my son in one of the visits that we did. And I'm like, 5 years is only this small amount of time and then look at all the rest of the life that we're going to have together to spend. And I'm like, these 5 years are going to go by fast. They're going to be gone before you know it. And by the time I get out, you will be an adult and we'll be able to spend as much time as we want to together. And that's something I've been trying to hammer home to him because he's devastated. He already lost his mom and now he's losing his dad. And,
Yeah.
I have two more visits with him left. And the last one's going to be really hard. But as
Yeah.
I've said in the rooms, tears are not a sign of weakness. Tears are a sign of strength because tears show that I love someone very much. And I do love my son very much.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I know I haven't been the world's best father, but I've also given the space for my son to tell me that. And we've had those conversations because it's true. Like, when active addiction, I was either in the bedroom sleeping because I was depressed or I was acting out.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times where he went hungry in the night because I didn't get up and cook him supper because I was too busy acting out, you
Yeah, the
know,
neglect.
the neglect. And giving him that space to be able to say those things to me and to express that and to tell him that's like, I hear you, I understand you. I'm very deeply sorry that I wasn't the father that you needed me to be. And then make a course of action of how I'm going to correct that.
Yeah.
Um, So there are a lot of things I wish I could have done differently, Jason. There's a lot of things throughout this whole process that I could have done since the death of my child's mother back in August of 2020. There's been 5 years worth of opportunities that I could have diverted myself from the path that I eventually have to walk now, which is 5+ years in prison. And I didn't do any of that. So to take away from anything that I've said during this whole time I've been sharing is the fact that there is no line that can't ultimately be crossed if the addiction isn't in remission.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And an addiction is only in remission on a daily basis, one day at a time. It's a spiritual program. And if a person tries to work a spiritual program without the spiritual aspect, it's not going to work because I've
Yeah.
tried it. I'm living proof of someone who intellectualized the 12 steps and it didn't work for him. It didn't work for me because I didn't have a spiritual practice. You can do all the inventories and all the lists, and you can write all the amends, and you can do all the service work, and you go to all the meetings, but none of that matters if there is no spirituality in the program. It
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
isn't going to work. I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm going to say this anyway. But like, I'm not saying that you have to get a Bible or a Quran or whatever and thump people over the head with it and be one of those people. You don't have to believe in a religious God, but there has to be a spiritual higher power that you have to believe in and fully believe in. And from my experiences, until I was willing to surrender to this concept that there is a power greater than myself, did I do the meditating and I do the praying because that's essential. Whether you pray to a tree or to uh, Morgan Freeman,
Mm-hmm.
which you know the inside joke on that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like you have to have something to believe in and a power greater than yourself, or else it just isn't going to work. Like I said, there is no such thing as a line that can't be crossed. I can't tell you how many times I was like, I won't cross this line. And then I crossed it. Then I'm like, okay, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to cross this line. And then I crossed it. And it goes on and on and on. I will be straight up and honest. If there's someone that knows their struggle with sex addiction and they to the point where they say it's like, well, I will never be as bad as this person, or I'll never do the things that this person did, that's full blown arrogance, and that's going to lead you right to those places that you never thought you'd be.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say also kind of the like I know we've been talking, well, I've been talking for a long time now,
Yeah, I got a
but
couple questions to get to,
okay.
but yeah, go for it.
I have forgiven my sister because I knew she did what she did for the best, what she
Mm-hmm.
thought was the best. I've forgiven her and I still love her and I would be there for her if she needed me today. I take full responsibility for my actions. I don't blame anyone but myself for the prison sentence I'm going to have to serve.
Mm-hmm.
I take full responsibility. And if I would have worked the program, I wouldn't be in this position. And I can't stress it enough. You have to work the program. I am the tale of what happens when you don't work the program. It ends up to losing almost every single thing that you love. I've lost almost every single thing that I've loved in certain aspects, and I might have more to lose. I don't know. But the important thing is I have my spiritual practice. I have the God of my understanding that I know loves me, and with that, I can know I can get through anything.
Yeah, I remember there's a period of time right when you were finding Buddhism. We had already passed steps 2 and 3 in our current working through the steps. But yeah, I remember that you took some time away from meetings and our step calls because you were on this spiritual journey. And I can remember working with you a few years ago on some step work. We weren't really sponsee, but I was helping you through some of the later steps because you'd been through the steps before. And I was seeing a disconnect in the spiritual aspect of the program, and seeing you before and after your time away from meetings and from our step work, I could see that something had changed. And so I wanted you to describe what you did for, I believe it was like 30 days or something, like a spiritual cleanse or something.
So, yeah, June and August sucked because I was trying to find a job. And I mean, and this ties into this.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't find a job. I put in over 80 applications. I had over a dozen interviews. But my probation officer told me that I had to be honest, that I had to tell him I can't work with minors, and I had to tell him I'm on pre-trial release. And there isn't very many employers out there, even temp agencies, that are going to want to hire you if you only can guarantee them 2 months worth of work.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I had the workforce development thing in our city and state tell me that you are unhireable, I'm like, I threw my hands up and I was frustrated. So there was that aspect of it. And then the other thing is too is like I was still struggling with the fantasies. I still
Mm-hmm.
was compulsively masturbating, and I was doing a lot of edging type,
Mm-hmm.
as what they call edging behaviors. And so one of the things that I really sat and thought about, I'm like, the computer and the acting out have been tied since I was 12 together. And so my idea was like, if I go without masturbation for 30 days and I go without any electronic usage or very minimal electronic usage for 30 days, that would be the jump start that I needed. And I'll be honest, I made it halfway through for the masturbation thing. I went about 15, 16 days,
Mm-hmm.
which is still impressive for me because I'm also single. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy to be masturbation free when you have a partner that you can get a sexual release from. It's a whole nother entirely different concept when you try to be masturbation free and you literally are celibate.
Yeah, yeah.
And even though I didn't make it to full 30 days, the electronic thing I did do. And I took a break from step work and I took away from meetings, but that doesn't mean I didn't do anything. I did a lot of work on my spiritual practice. I was reading it's called the Dhammapada, which is pretty much the meat and potatoes of the Buddhist teaching.
Mm-hmm.
It's as important to Buddhism as Sermon of the Mount is to Christians.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I worked that and I learned how to cope by, coloring. I was doing a lot of writing, journaling. And at the end of the month, I was itching to get back to meetings. And in the month of October, like I felt I've been in such a better place. It hasn't been perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but it's been so much better than I could have ever possibly have imagined. And it's not even that I just have a love for God. I have a love for everyone now.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love so much more, and I am present for so much more than I never was present before. And so that September is what I really needed, was time away. And not time away to act out, but time away to center myself. And that was really beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to mention step 4 when we started working on that. The amount of frustrations and fuck this that was coming up for you. And I was brought up going through the big book of AA and using a grid format and using that as a springboard for 5 through 9 and having that as the template. And you were wanting to do it your way. And I'm just like, hey, that's great. I'm glad that worked for you in the past, which it probably didn't, but this is how we're going to do it this time. And just the resistance I had for a bit from you, and then we finally got over that. And it was right around the time where you were having resentments with your mom and your sister and the system and just everything, and being able to kind of work through those resentments when we got to step 5 and started talking through those, I noticed a transformation. When we were working on a lot of this, it did seem like we were able to come close to working a step a month. But this was where it kind of step 4 is big, so it did push it out a little bit. But yeah, I noticed that once you got a hold of the concepts in there and started working through it, that things got a lot easier. And so I was wanting to hear your reflections on that.
Well, first off, I want to say that you've never told me any of this before. This is a first, so I'm hearing a lot of this for the first time. Your retrospective, so which is cool, and that's cool for me. And it's funny because I have the 12 and 12, right? So because we work out of that, and I went through steps 1 and 2, and I re-looked at that, and I was so hung up on the word alcohol that I had to cross out every reference of alcoholism in the 12 and 12 from steps 1 and step 2. And I said this in the second podcast, like I resented AA. And a lot of it was because of the fact that I'm like, we have our own program, AA doesn't use SAA materials. Like I had this big hang up on it. But what I didn't realize is the fact that you can get so much wisdom from any different source. And the AA Big Book does have a lot of benefits. Now, is it archaic in some ways? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, like, no one told me how to do a step 4. And that was one of the things I was really pissed about, because when I did one of my step 4s, it was my second step 4, I typed out 30 pages worth of stuff. The green book was written with the people that had understanding of what the 4th step was in the big book. So they didn't mention all the stuff in the big book and how to do a proper 4th step in the green book. I mean, you have to know how step 4 works in the big book before you can understand how it works in the green book. It's like you can't learn calculus until you learn algebra.
Yeah.
In that sense. And that was what that disconnect, like, because once I read it out of the big book, step 4, and we worked through the grids and stuff, like I went back and reread step 4 in the green book, and I'm like, okay, this is where they're talking about the inventories here and here, but unless you know what you're looking for, you're not going to, it's very difficult to spot. And so I was like, that's why I think a lot of people get the misconception that is step 4 is a life story, which it isn't. That's more of step 1. And you were actually on one of my resentments on that grid that I did,
I remember.
You're right. But, the thing is, I told you in the beginning that no matter what, I was going to do whatever you asked me to do. And even though I was frustrated a lot, during step 4, and there were times where I thought I was going to go AWOL and just do it on my own, I reminded myself that's like, this guy is taking a chance on you, and he gets a lot of requests to be a sponsor. And you promised that no matter what, you were going to work the program that he wanted you to work, even if it meant going through the big book and going through the 12 and 12. It was a lot of crow I had to eat, but I'm like, I did make a promise, and if I value myself as a human being, I'm going to follow through with this commitment. And I do get a lot out of the 12 and 12 in particular, which was written about 20 or 30 years after the AA Big Book. I get a lot from the 12 and 12, but the Big Book still has a lot of good information in it too. If you can get over the time period that it was written in and the language that it's written in, if you can overcome that, there's a lot of good nuggets in the Big Book. It's not the end-all, be-all. I think the Green Book is still a very vastly important tool in the program, and I think it's a mistake to not use the Green Book, even if you primarily want to work out of the Big Book because it's familiar. I think it's a big mistake not to read the SAA Green Book.
Yeah, that's why I assign all 3 whenever I'm doing step work. Yeah, and as we've been going through the steps and just realizing that there's a finite timeline that we're working on, we're currently working on finishing up 8 and starting step 9. And I'm hoping within the next week or so that we are able to finalize a couple of amends on the 9th step. I mean, for me, the 9th step, there were a few on my first time through the steps that I wasn't able to get to until a few years afterwards. Just because we're moving on to the next step doesn't mean we're officially done with step 9. Step 9 will be something that we continue to work on, but I want to get you at least to 10, and you already have prayer and meditation as part of step 11. So getting you to a place where step 10, we're working on 1 through 9 on a daily basis. And so when you enter the prison system that you've got this daily structure that you can start to work on and find some spiritual growth in those years that you're going to be incarcerated.
Yeah, when I go into custody, there's going to be a 3 or 5 month period I'm going to be in a county jail. But county, I don't know because they don't
Mm.
tell you until you actually go there. And that's for safety concerns,
Yeah, yeah.
in case there's a Mission Impossible 5 scenario that happens and someone tries to break you out. I guess that's, whatever. But then once I go to a federal facility, because here's the deal, prisons in general have more resources than county jails. And
Hmm.
so even though it's not necessarily a place you want to be in, to be able to get the most out of your time there, if you have the right mindset, being in a prison is better than being in county jail
Hmm.
in a sense because they have more resources and they have more stuff that you can do to better yourself. And yes, I think Hollywood doesn't do a lot of like favors in
Hmm.
this idea. Like they show like what a supermax prison looks like or what a high security prison looks like, but that's not all like that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the fear factor is intensified because of these misconceptions.
Hmm.
And if there isn't an SAA meeting where I'm going to start one. Like that's kind of
Yeah.
that's the idea. And I want to learn all the classes and all the programs. Whatever they're going to have, I'm going to do it because if I'm going to be someplace for 5 years and I can't leave it, I want to make the most of it. I want to get something out of it. Like I'm not just going to keep my head down and just kind of like just do my time and get out because that's not going to benefit me.
Yeah. Yeah. Right where we are in the pocket of podcast episodes, 175 is a recording from our Giving Thanks event. And that person is heavily involved with sponsoring people at San Quentin and has been an active role in our intergroup into getting SAE meetings into San Quentin. Because a lot of the people on the inside have started meetings, but they don't have the material and or the know-how of what meetings are like on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And so seeing all the red tape and everything that is involved in getting that up and running, trying to get the institutional knowledge of how meetings are run, how the steps work and stuff into the prisons is a difficult process. Another conversation that I'm having will probably be on episode 176. We also got into talking about the prison system and working with prisoners, writing prisoners, things like that. And the ISO does have prisoner outreach committee. And in the Bay Area, we'll get requests for sponsorship and correspondence with people in our local prisons. We still have to go through the ISO because there are certain protocols and they understand those protocols with the prisons, and then they'll reach back out to us. And so it's just interesting hitting a pocket of episodes where I'll be talking about this stuff and sharing details in the show notes and the readings and stuff like that.
Right. And if I have one hope for this particular episode is that you know, I want to take the time to thank everyone that listened to my previous podcasts I've been on. I'm very grateful for all the people that have reached out to me and how many people that they said I inspired to work their own program stronger because of my shares. And it's a very humbling experience. I'm very grateful. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular podcast today because I'll be gone for 5+ years. And so there will be no opportunities, you know, when you're getting close to having 1,000 episodes, and it still boggles my mind that we have almost 200. We're getting close to 200
Yeah, yeah.
episodes. And just from where it started, I'm very proud of you for sticking with it and having the dedication to do that, plus all the other service work that you do. It's very amazing. And I'm very grateful for you and grateful for the space. There is hope in sometimes hopeless situations that
Yeah.
seem hopeless, that seem like there's no way out. There is hope. And I'm grateful that I have all this knowledge I'm going to be able to take in with me to be able, if there are no meetings run, I can start one. And if there
Hmm.
are meetings there, I can bring a different perspective.
Yes.
I'm not looking forward to the negative aspects of prison, like not being able to see my son, not being able to see my mom, and restrictions and freedoms and stuff like that. But I am looking forward to see how much spiritual growth I'll have between now and the time I get out. And that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate everything that you've done for being on the podcast and being the voice of courage to have your story out there in the midst of all of this chaos, because it does reach people. It does connect with people who are afraid to talk about it and afraid to get help. And so I applaud you so much for the episodes that you've already been on and for coming up with the idea of doing this one a couple of weeks before you head in. And super grateful for that. And I know we'll be in communication as best we can during your time in there. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we wrapped up?
No, as we're getting closer to Thanksgiving, I'm very thankful. Not even just all the, I have a lot of blessings, but I also have a lot of, there are the obvious blessings. I'm like, oh, this is really good. But there are also hidden blessings and a lot of things that I've been going through that, stress and pain are part of growth. And I'm going to have to go through more pain and more lessons I'm going to have to learn before I get to where I want to be at. But just accepting the fact that the lessons are going to come and willing to lean into it is the best gift that I possibly could have gotten out of this whole experience. And I just want to express that don't take for granted the things that you have.
Mm-hmm.
If you have children, don't take it for granted for your children. If you have a spouse or a significant other, don't take them for granted. If you have recovery and sobriety and sponsees and sponsors and all the other therapists, don't take any of them for granted, because you never know what life is going to entail. And I don't want people to lose as much as I'm losing right now before they work the program. I'm hoping that this will be a cautionary tale, that the program has to be a lifestyle. It's not a diet. It's not a fad. It's a way of living. You have to have this way of living in order for to have this addiction in remission. There is no cure. You're never going to be a ham. Right?
Mm-hmm.
My sincerest hope is that I can help people with not just with this podcast, but where I'm going. And I expect to see every single one of you in those rooms when I get back. And I expect the room to have 200 people in it. Like, I expect big things from you guys in the next 5 years. And I'm really looking forward to being able to come back and see how much growth everything has had. So
thank you, Rye, for your words of wisdom there and for everything. And I'm grateful that we had this chance to record this before you went in. And over the next few weeks, we will be working hard on our steps.
Yes, sounds good, Jason. You have yourself a good day, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good, Rye. Adios. Many, many thanks to Rye for his courage, not only with sharing his story here on the podcast on the various episodes, but also with what he's going to be facing in prison and the dedication that he has for working the steps to making his life better. So he and I are currently working out how we're going to be corresponding while he's away. There is a chance that we can do phone calls, but I will definitely be finding a way of communicating, and it could actually be through the Prisoner Outreach Committee that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode. A few weeks ago, Rye asked me to write a letter for his case, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a paragraph here that I wanted to read on the podcast. And I wrote, I first met Rye in 2021 when he started attending one of our SAA Zoom meetings regularly. Over the past year, I've been working with Rye on the 12 steps of SAA as his sponsor. In this time, Rye has expanded his spiritual development through Buddhism in his step work and by working with his spiritual advisor. A few times, Rye has been a guest on the podcast that I produce. His ability to speak the honest truth about his actions, behaviors, and mental states has helped countless addicts find recovery worldwide, as well as being a friendly voice for people to connect to at meetings. And then there's some other personal things about his case, and I'm not going to read that here on the podcast. But during our text exchange, Rye had mentioned a song by Linkin Park. And he wrote, there's a song by Linkin Park called What I've Done. It fits me perfectly. And so I wanted to read some of the lyrics before sharing a clip of the song. In this farewell, there's no blood 'cause there's no alibi, 'cause I've drawn regret from the truth of 1,000 lies. So let mercy come and wash away what I've done. I'll face myself to cross out what I've become, erase myself and let go of what I've done. To put to rest what you thought of me while I clean this slate with the hands of uncertainty. So let mercy and come and wash away what I've done. I'll face myself to cross out what I've become, erase myself, and let go of what I've done, for what I've done, and start again. And whatever pain may come, today this ends. I'm forgiving what I've done. I'll face myself to cross out what I've become, erase myself, and let go of what I've done. And so now I wanted to play a clip of the song What I've Done. It's amazing, and yeah, Chester's voice is just awesome. Although I've never seen the movie, this song was featured at the ending of the Transformers movie in 2007. But yeah, I'm really glad that he mentioned that, and this one will go on the spiritual playlist. I have played Linkin Park here on the podcast a few times. Their song Breaking the Habit was on one of my first spiritual mixes that I made. With that, I'm going to close out this episode. And if you had any feedback for the podcast about any specific episodes, or if you had any music that is part of your recovery that you want to share here on the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Or if you wanted to get a hold of me personally, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. Being that this comes out right before Thanksgiving, I'm so thankful for everyone tuning into this episode. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.